This is the Heidelburg Prime Scan. 550 pounds of raw German engineering that can turn this 4x5-inch negative into a 320 megapixel digital file. And this is the Fuji GFX 50S2. 2 pounds of Japanese engineering that could turn this 4.5-inch negative into a 200 pixel digital file. Surely some silly little digital mirrorless camera can't hold a candle to this massive behemoth of film scanning technology, can it? Well, that's what we're going to try to find out today. So, I've never personally done much with the concept of shooting a negative with a digital camera and using that as the scans. People have been doing that for quite a while now, and it's a pretty well-established process. But I always owned digital cameras with a native sensor size, couldn't come close to what Mr. Heidelburg over there could pull off. But then once I got the old Mega Fuji here and discovered it had this feature called Pixel Shift. Huh? Are you just assuming that I know what you're talking about when you say Pixel Shift? Let me talk! So my monkey understanding of Pixel Shift is that the camera has a built-in in-body image stabilization, and what that means is that the sensor is kind of detached from the body, so the sensor can float freely while the body moves to keep the image stable, kind of like what a chicken's head does. And what Pixel Shift does is it turns those tables upside down, and now you steady the body, and then the sensor moves like half pixel, half pixel, half pixel, half pixel, over and over until it takes 16 photos, and then it pumps all that data into a separate computer program that combines them all and generates a file which is 4 times the size as the native sensor size of this camera. And to put that in perspective, Mr. Heidelburg back there, from a 4x5-inch ratio, the biggest file it's going to spit out is about 16,000 by 20,000 pixels. With the Mega Fuji in Pixel Shift mode, you're going to get about 12,000 by 16,000 pixels. Huh? But that's a smaller number. Yes, that is a lower number, so obviously that's better. But the thing is, like, megapixel size doesn't matter all that much after a certain point. Like, when I scan my large format negatives with that thing, I tend to target a resolution that's actually smaller than what this thing will spit out just because of time and storage constraints. I don't need that maximum size file for anything I do, so I don't even go there. And since this is my first go at serious scanning negatives with a digital camera, there's a few caveats with what I'm doing today. For one, there is a well-established cottage industry for providing goods and materials that make scanning with your camera much more easier and fun, and those all cost money. The first caveat is I want to try doing this and getting a workable result, spending as little money as possible. And 2, I'm only going to work with black and white. As the quality of the light you use to shine up to the negative can affect your color balance, I don't want to discover I only have piss poor lights and make some really wretched looking photo that knocks all the winds out of my sail of trying to do this. And I don't want to spend money on a nice fancy light board right now, so black and white it is, okay? So from what I've gathered, there's kind of 2 established ways of doing this. The first is to take your camera and buy a really nice macro lens for it to shoot your negative. And the second is take a not quite so really nice macro lens, just a normal lens, and use a bellows system or a helicoid to extend the focal range of that lens so you can focus closer and focus in on your negative. Now, I personally fear how much a really nice macro lens might cost for the Fuji GFX system, and I don't want to spend money on this experiment, so I got to think about what could I possibly have in my possession that would act like a bellows focusing system. If only there were some device that photographers have been using for decades that I might just have sitting around, like, oh, the Omega D2 4x5 enlarger from like 1947. I think we can make this work. So what we need to do is get the head off this enlarger so we can attach the Fuji to here instead of the light source. So the first step is we're going to want to raise this up and just drop out the condenser and remove that. And then go store it someplace safe. I personally like to store my condenser in a 4-gallon salad dressing bucket wrapped in a dirty old towel. So once the condenser is in the mayonnaise bucket and you've unplugged your enlarger head, it's really easy to get the top of the head off. You just take these little knobs here and loosen them. And once they are properly loosened, just boop, boop, Off comes the head. Go put it someplace nice to store. Doesn't necessarily have to be in a mayonnaise bucket. Now that we got the top of the enlarger off, we got to figure out a way to fit the Fuji GFX over this big fist-size hole. We can't just set it there, it'll fall through. What I find works pretty well is you take the 6x6 centimeter negative carrier for the Omega D2 and you just slide it on there, and suddenly we have a much smaller hole that's far easier to mount the camera to. And since this apparently just doesn't sit there real nice, it's time to spend a little money to adapt the GFX to the D2. So the first thing I had to order from China was this ring right here, which is a GFX to M65x1 thread adapter. And then to attach to that, I also had to order a 17mm extension tube. It's like a magic trick. Wow. With the round extension tube attached to the Fuji GFX, can you guess where that goes?
That's right, the square hole.
And at this point, the camera is just gravity held on top of the square hole, so I like to just undo the strap latch clicky thingy and add a little security to the process. And finally, to complete the setup, we just kick the screen up so we can see what we're doing. So with this setup, instead of having to track down some stupid expensive macro lens, we are just going to utilize an old 1980s, 1990s, whenever these came out, an El-Nikkor 80mm enlarging lens. And for my light source, I'm just going to use this Viltrox L116T little LED light that I use for videos sometimes when I need a nice video right in my face. We're going to put that right below the lens, and then on top of it, I got an opaque piece of diffusing that came with my other lights for making video, and we're going to stack that on top of it to diffuse the light a little bit more. And then to hold whatever negative I'm shooting into place, I'm just going to take the film holder for the D2, set that right on top of the light with the negative in it. So one more thing we need to address before we can take this pixel shift scan. As is with this particular lens on this particular enlarger, even with the enlarger head as low as it can go, it doesn't even come near to filling the entire space we have to work with on the camera. And so to remedy this problem, I'm going to take the negative and prop it up underneath this knockoff Pelican aluminum horrible, terrible case that is currently just holding my Bronica. And there we go. We now can fit the entire frame well within the full sensor size of the GFX. And with the camera aimed down like this and the top pointing at us into our eyes, we can see the histogram on top really easily to give us an idea if our exposure is correct for the image up there. If it's off, we just adjust our exposure compensation either way until we collect all the data in one scan without blowing our highlights or clipping our shadows. So now that I got the enlarger head at the proper distance for this negative, and it's focused to the point where I can see the grain on the screen when I magnify the focus, it's just time to take the picture. You can either set a self-timer for a couple seconds to hit the button and walk away, or if you got a cheap remote like this, just plug it into the remote hole and there we have it. All I gotta do now is take that USB card out, run it up to my workstation, and see what kind of results we got. That is where I'd hoped this part of the story would have ended, except there was a problem. Once I'd take all these raw files up to my workstation and run them through the computer to mash them together, half the time it would be like, defect detected, and then you look at the merged image and it's all these weird artifacts. I mean, kind of makes sense, not like this is the most stable situation I got going here. But it's no good to do a batch of film scans and find out that half of them don't work, right? So what I needed to do was add a quality assurance step before the negative even comes off the carrier. To do that, the Pixel Shift Combinator application allows you to shoot in tethered mode. So I dug out an old laptop that's been sitting in storage for quite a while and tried to hook it up to the GFX. Except I forgot that I'd spilled a beer on this laptop and the whole keyboard mouse thing doesn't work anymore. So I dug an old workstation out of my storage and set that up next to the enlarger to work as my quality assurance Pixel Shift computer radarator. And I think the manual said you want to use a USB cable that's no longer than 5 feet. Well, for this adventure, I got a very not 5 foot long, lowest quality USB cable we can find, and we're gonna see if this works too. Let's turn on the computer. So let's turn on this computer and shift some pixels. Ooh. I am sorry for the trauma I just introduced by making you see the sad state of all the icons on my desktop. I have a problem, okay? And you can help me solve this problem. If you go to www.clickroach.com right now, what you will find is an assortment of various fine art photography prints I have in stock. To help me declutter this desktop, for every print that sells before the summer solstice, I will delete one icon from that desktop. Help me. But finally, with this workstation attached to the GFX, all we have to do is click this mouse button and we'll know within minutes if the pixel shift has succeeded. Here's the part where the low quality USB cable kicks in and it slows down. And there we have it. It's that simple. Now how about we look at these results and see if our minds are blown away. Scooby-Doo card. So, you're all familiar with that saying, the proof is in the pudding, correct? Well, look at all this pudding. 2 24 by 30 inch prints made from a 4 by 5 inch negative taken in 1947. One with the GFX and the other with the Heidelburg Drum Scanner. Can you tell them apart? Because I sure as hell can't. No matter how deep I dig into these two prints, nothing, absolutely nothing, sets one apart from the other. Except for I left a flaw in this one where a hair got trapped on the drum scan, which caused a little bubble. By not removing that one flaw is the only thing I could find in these prints to tell apart which one came from which source. It's that good. And it's the same story with every other negative I scanned using both methods. Like take this selfie I shot of myself. Can you tell which of these prints is from which source? I didn't think so, which is why I'm not even going to bother labeling them on the screen. If you can tell a difference, it's probably something stupid like one I adjusted the contrast a little harder, but the sharpness, bam, they're just identical. It's crazy. I didn't bother doing any 6 by 6 centimeter negatives because I was using the holder to keep the camera in place, but I did do a bunch of 35 millimeter negatives as well, and while I don't have direct one-to-one comparisons of those particular frames, nothing in them makes me go, oh yeah, I would get a better result from the drum scanner. They look absolutely as I'd expect from the drum scanner. And one more little neat thing about this process that I didn't anticipate but totally made sense. Back in the day when people would make darkroom prints of the 35 millimeter negatives, it was a common practice to take a file to your metal carrier on your negative so that you expand the hole a little bit, and then when you print your negative, it gives like a black box around the frame of the picture so you can say, one, I didn't crop this, and two, it's just a nice aesthetic to plop that picture onto a sheet of paper. And since the negative carrier is one that I too had taken a file to at some point in the past, that little aesthetic trick was replicated perfectly through a digital means. Nice. So the final thoughts here that I'm pretty much stunned at how well the Fuji GFX and this little lens that I paid $29 for was able to trade punches with the big 550-pound Gorilla Drum Scanner, no problem for black and white negatives. So I think it's actually a worthwhile pursuit to keep going with this process for color negatives and to bulking up the enlarger thing so it's not just a bunch of garbage I piled together, you know, and flopping around. Maybe get that a little bit sturdier, get a better light, and if I don't have to spend 20 minutes mounting and cleaning and polishing a drum scanner to shoot one little frame that might be complete buttholes, then yes, I want that in my toolkit. So if, I said buttholes? If I ever go down this path again and into video form, I'll make it appear right here and you can continue on with the journey. But in the event that that hasn't happened yet or never happens, you can watch this video right here, which the robots at YouTube think you'll really enjoy. Like this video and move on.